All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Brad Gilmer, Executive Director of the AMWA, and really appreciate you taking time out of your day to be with us for this presentation. I want to recognize that we always have conflicts trying to find the best time for everyone. I know we have some people on in Asia and in New Zealand, and it's the middle of the night there. So thank you for bearing with us. There's never a good time for everyone, unfortunately. Secondly, with going on with a couple of housekeeping items, this is being recorded. I just want to be sure that everyone is aware of that fact. Thirdly, I have the great pleasure of working at home out of my office, which you can see, and I share my office with my wonderful wife, so you may see her coming and going in the background. She takes care of what she needs to do in the office as well. And lastly, before we get started, I would just say that this presentation and the input that we get from this session is very timely. The AMWA every year engages in a strategic planning meeting series. We're in the middle of that meeting series. We'll actually be meeting later in the week out at the SEMPI Technology Conference, the day after the Technology Conference. Then we'll have a follow-on meeting in November. And those meetings are where the board talks about future direction for the AMWA, and so the input that we get from this activity will be really material in setting our future direction. So we really appreciate your participation here, and at the end we will be calling for input, and if you feel like you want to give some input, just know that that'll go straight to the board and will be taken into account as the board considers the next activities that the AMWA is going to engage in. So let's go ahead and get started. So as I said, my name is Brad Gilmer. I'm the Executive Director, and if you would like to get in touch with me about anything, but including this presentation, there's my email, brad@gilmer.tv. Before we delve into today's subject, we thought it might be good, since there are a number of people who signed up for this who haven't, as far as we know, participated heavily in AMWA activities before. Might be good to just describe what the association is and what we do, just to set the stage for the discussion later. So the AMWA is a worldwide association with 90+ members. We have members that are end users, they're suppliers, we have system integrators, we have consultants, a number of different categories of people, software developers, and number of technology specialists. A lot of these people are specialists in software applied to professional media applications. And by professional media applications, I mean traditional broadcasting, over the top, movie and television content owners, and content channel distributors. We're also, I think importantly, it's good to know that we're members of the Joint Task Force on Networked Media, or the JTNM, which has been a key sponsor of IP showcases that you've seen, and has done a lot of work to try to coordinate the activities between a number of different organizations in the industry, the AMWA included, and we're partners in that with the EBU, the SMPTE, and the VSF on the steering board, or the admin group, we call it, in that group. So what do? We could talk about, we create specifications, we foster discussions in the industry, but at the end of the day, what we do is we help businesses to improve efficiencies, increase agility, drive down costs, And especially for manufacturers, we seek to establish a base level of interoperability on top of which manufacturers can innovate and do their best work and make money for it. At the end of the day, though, we try very hard to be sure that while we are technologists, we are not doing technology just for technology's sake. And instead, everything that we do, everything that we take on is driven by a real business need. And ultimately, that business need comes from the end users. So with that as a very brief introduction, and if you want more information about the AMWA, of course, you can go on our website at amwa.tv. You're also welcome to contact Neil Dunstan, who is our Director of Membership and Marketing, and he can give you quite a bit more information about the AMWA. Let's talk about what today's session is about. And before we delve into this, one of the things that I think is good to understand about the AMWA is that, in effect, we operate a village green. You can think of the area in an old village where people used to come together and they would talk about issues of the day and work together to resolve problems that the village was facing. And that village was a safe place where people could come and talk about ideas. And maybe there would be a synergy between 2 or 3 people that showed up to talk about their ideas, and that got picked up by the village. And then the village worked together to solve those problems. What we operate in the AMWA is just like that. It's not like the AMWA have vast amounts of resources for someone to just come in and suggest an idea, and then it's like the AMWA is going to just take that on and it's going to happen somehow. We work together collaboratively to achieve goals in the industry. So at the end of the day, if you look at this diagram, what we're really striving to do is to deliver business benefits in the media industry. And I have looked at a number of different media organizations, and I've worked at Turner Broadcasting Systems for many years. And at the end of the day, for just about every media in this entity that I have ever participated in or been aware of, the business goal was always to efficiently and cost-effectively monetize content across a number of delivery platforms. And you might need to reword that a little bit if you come from a public broadcaster point of view. But at the end of the day, even public broadcasters, they're still looking to make efficient use of any funds and content that they have, and to make that, in fact, many of them have a mandate from the government to make their content available to as many people in their communities across as many platforms as possible. So how specifically in our world are we looking at doing that? Well, the JTNM has worked very hard to establish a framework through which we can efficiently monetize content. And a key component of that is really the JTNM reference architecture core. And if you go to jt-nm.org, you will find a link there to a document which is a reference architecture. And in that reference architecture, there are a number of really key fundamental concepts that potentially unlock the value of media and really make it much more efficient to monetize that content. And a few of those key concepts are an immutable identity, and an identity that can be instantly created and permanently assigned to anything within a media system, so that that resource later can be uniquely called upon to do a particular piece of work or a piece of content can be unambiguously identified. This notion of a mutable identity is really a key part of the framework. There are also timing models in that document that help to explain the relationship between time in many different aspects of our industry. There's also the notion of flows and grains. And that notion is that there is some sort of fundamental unit of content, whether it's an audio sample, a video frame, a chunk of essence data, and that those grains typically in our industry are consumed as sequential flows with a certain timing associated with them. And so it's not just a loose collection of grains, although it may be in a database, and even individual grains can have their own unique identity, so that each grain, each video frame, or each audio sample could be uniquely identified. But that flow may have a particular context. It may be a particular movie, or it may be a particular live event, and so on. And that, by the way, could also have its own immutable identity associated with it. And so this concept of building up from grains to flows that have unique identities, these are all core concepts within the JT&M reference architecture framework. And then lastly, there's several common models. Timing is just one of them, but there's also models in that document about how flows relate to grains and how those concepts relate to senders and receivers of content. And I think the industry has been, appropriately very focused on moving to IP and to 2110, and very focused on flows of that kind. But I would point out that these concepts could be associated with anything from SDI all the way up to content that's being pulled through playlists and HTTP being viewed on web browsers. So it's at the JT&M reference architecture level, it's purposely higher up than at a particular technology delivery or transport level. So that enabling framework could be used, as it shows down at the bottom of this drawing in kind of the multicolored layered bit, which used to be called the JT&M roadmap. It could be used, as I said, all the way through from SDI through elementary flows, and with NMOS technology on top of that. We'll talk some more about that later. But it also could be applied to these decentralized facilities, facilities that are built on non-media specific IT, or used on media applications that are specifically fit to run in a cloud environment. And as the drawing shows here as well, and the lower right portion, these concepts could also be applied in OTT delivery or for ATSC 3.0, 5G, and radio. Don't forget, audio is a critical part of our industry. And of course, radio is a freestanding industry on its own. And these core concepts all can be applied to that as well. Today, though, as we look at this overall view, what we want to focus on is the green bit. And we could call it all kinds of other things, but let's just stick with that for now. It's the green slice of the JT&M reference, or the JT&M roadmap. And by the way, I just want to go back to this for a minute. One reason that we stopped specifically promoting the roadmap and we stopped showing it together is because people assumed on the roadmap there was a natural progression from SDI to elementary flows and then adding resource management. And once you had done all of those things, then the next logical step was dematerialized facilities. And what we realized was that people were thinking that they needed to wait in order to move to dematerialized facilities until all this other stuff, basically with 2110, had run its course. The thing is, people who are already operating dematerialized facilities know that's not the case. And we do too. Many play out operations are already happening in the cloud. A lot of other media applications are already happening. And so in this slide, we specifically split the green bit from everything else. And in this presentation, we're going to focus on this green bit because it is happening already right now. And the move to IP and 2110 based facilities is happening simultaneously while people are also moving to these dematerialized facilities. So I think it would be good to concentrate on the right portion of this for a moment and understand what we're talking about when we talk about dematerialized facilities. So the notion of a dematerialized facility is that media facilities no longer need to exist within the four walls of a media facility. That these facilities are starting to become dispersed as it's possible to run these facilities on software, run them on generic IT platforms, and have some combination of on-premises and off-premises facilities, having those comprise your overall operation, and that some of your stuff may run still on generic COTS, a consumer off-the-shelf IT in your facility, but also some of it may be leased, frankly. The only thing about a cloud really is that you're just leasing the hardware from somebody else. That does enable the concentration of all the compute and monetary resources, and that does open some other possibilities as well. But fundamentally, you're leasing. And so today we want to talk about this green bit, and we really are asking the industry for ideas about what the AMWA might be able to contribute in order to make things easier and establish that base level of interoperability that then manufacturers and suppliers could innovate on top of, that would make things easier for everyone in the industry. And I want to be clear here, if there's some work to be done in this area, that's great. If there's not work to be done in this area, that's also fine. We just don't, I think the board does not want to miss an opportunity for us to work together collectively if there is an opportunity here. But those opportunities need to be business driven. So what's not in today's presentation? Well, today's presentation is about media. It may be the first one that you've attended in a while that's not about 2110. It's not about the AMWA's Networked Media Open Specifications, or NMOS. It has nothing to do with PTP and Precision Timing Protocol. It's not about the EBU pyramid, which many of you will have seen before. It's not about DNS, DHCP, LLDP. It's not about any of that. It's also not about live sports, although if you're willing to assume a little bit of delay and call that near live sports, actually it could be. That is not out of the question. So what does a media company do? We've already talked about this to some degree, but a media company acquires content from a wide range of sources. And when I worked for Ted Turner, some of you will know him, a rather flamboyant guy in the industry. He used to pound his fist on the table and he would say, I'll get the content. I'll get the content. It's your guys' job to figure out how to make money off that content once I get it. And so he did. He bought movie studios, he acquired baseball teams and so on. But once we had that content available, then what? Well, for sure, one of the biggest challenges we face once we have that content available is being able to very efficiently repurpose that content across an ever-growing set of platforms, and being able to deliver that content and the appropriate metadata to drive that through a very wide range of distribution channels. But at the end of the day, the goal for media companies is to monetize content quickly, efficiently, and cost effectively. So what are some of the challenges of traditional facilities? Oh, I was supposed to insert another presentation here. Ugh. No, actually, you already know this. You've already heard this part. You know the challenges that we face in continuing to operate traditional facilities in the very dynamic environment that we have. These traditional facilities are very vertically, tightly integrated. They're very good at taking content through a fixed workflow and creating a particular output from it with all the artifacts that are necessary to drive that. But they're not very flexible, and they do not deal well with needing to change workflows around as the requirements of these different distribution endpoints change, which, by the way, they do. And so not only do we have new outlets, new business opportunities, basically, to monetize content coming up, which are almost exactly the same as other ones, but they're a little bit different. They require a little something different, but the channels that we've already got established, those things now are changing quickly in terms of the requirements that they have for different kinds of metadata, different opportunities to make money as well. And these static, nailed up facilities that used to be quite efficient in the past and actually have some pretty long life to them, they're really not the appropriate tools going forward. So when I put this presentation together, I wanted to start with a premise. And the premise is that there are new kinds of agile facilities that we can build that will allow us to efficiently reach the goal, which is to monetize content efficiently. And that the key elements in this are that strict timing may only be required at the end, maybe at the end viewer. It may be that time is floating all over the place as content moves through a facility and actually out through the distribution. And it's only when that content is actually played back, let's say in an HTML5 browser, that everything is synced up in order to present that content to the end user. And that is very important because it really frees us from a lot of constraints that we've imposed on ourselves in the industry over the years. Also, a key element of this is composable workflows, and the requirement for the composable workflows is driven by what I said before, which is that the target, what we are trying to deliver to, and the business opportunities that media companies have is now much more fluid and changing than it used to be. That means we need composable workflows where we can add different, let's say, metadata processing capabilities, or really change some of the processing in the chain in order to effectively deliver to a new kind of distribution technology. That we need to have much more composable workflows than we had before. a key point of being able to have composable workflows is that you have atomic units of functionality that are available in the platform that you're using that you can then consume as part of a workflow. And that functionality is not tremendously complex, and that piece of thing doesn't do 18 other things that you don't need right now. And therefore, that piece of functionality has a very simple interface to it, and it's very easy programmatically to tell that thing what it is you need it to do in your workflow. And this is, frankly, not the way that traditional products have been built, but it really is a key element in being able to meet the premise that I've put out here. We need to adopt best practices in IT. So the industry has been working very hard over the last few years to transition to IP. And IP is important. It's the basis for 2110 and a number of other components. But we will not really be able to achieve the goal that's listed in the previous slide unless we really make the transition to IT. And we are able to employ their best practices, their most efficient technologies. Another key component of this, it really is breaking down that bit about atomic functionality and talking about microservices. And this is really a key concept to the green bit. Those atomic pieces of functionality could be presented as pieces of hardware, little boxes that are in a rack that you wire up using SDI cables, and it just does one effect, and you hit it with a GPI and it does a wipe or something. But of course, that's not the world that we're living in. Increasingly, that device that might just do a wipe when you hit it with a GPI is actually a service, a little service, a microservice sitting out on the network, waiting to be subscribed into some part of a workflow where you need that little piece of functionality. And it needs to be used within some sort of common framework where we know how to instantiate that. We know how to make that one piece available. And when we're done with it, we know how to decompose it. And we know how to consume it. We know how it's identified. It could be identified using these notions of strong identity that we talked about earlier. But I think a key question, and I'm asking this in a partnership with our vendors, members in the AMWA, and non-member suppliers who are attending this presentation, is this fundamentally an anathema to your business? Is it really not possible for us to have a microservice environment and for vendors to really build some sort of a business where their piece could be easily taken out and somebody else's piece could be put in, or where their piece would then fit into some workflow, which would then have some competitor's piece as the next microservice, and we can establish some sort of commonality so that it's easy for the end user to flow out of the microservices that you sell into somebody else's service. Is this so complicated that the only way to do this is to buy some overall orchestration system that comes from a single vendor, and that's really the only way that this will get built? If some of this is true, then there may not be a role for the AMWA here. It may be that end users just buy product from manufacturers and that's it. Again, as I said, that's fine. But I do think that it's a fundamental question, and a question for the vendors is whether this really is at odds with the traditional product view of suppliers. I think we know it is. Does that mean it's just a non-starter, or can some manufacturers change their thinking and work within this environment? I don't know. I personally don't have a strong background in them. Sorry, just a moment. I personally don't have a strong background in the manufacturer environment, and I would really appreciate your inputs on this. So if we do move to cloud-based production, what are some of the potential benefits here? Well, lower capital expenses, but not necessarily lower overall costs. One of the things that's important to know when you're looking at this from an end user view is that tax laws in different countries materially affect how companies look at investing in capital equipment versus looking at investing in operational equipment. And so in the United States and in some countries in Europe, leasing actually, there's a strong tax benefit to leasing, and a lot of investment in capital equipment is not encouraged. And that matters a lot, and it matters increasingly as media companies really are run by financial people, and they're not run as much by people who really specialize in media anymore. There are new opportunities for content monetization. If you look at cloud-based production, and a lot of this has to do with the holy grail of being able to really target specific content to specific viewers. And there are a number of media companies that are already engaging in trials around this. But in order to do that, they really need the benefits of cloud-based production, including the scalability and the ability to have composable workflows. Excuse me. There are all the entities that have been the basis of a number of sales presentations by cloud vendors over the years, being scalable or scalability, agility, composability, and so on. All those entities that you've heard before. Not going to go into that, but you've heard about them. Another very compelling point for cloud-based production is business continuity, and being able to specify that certain facilities be replicated in diverse locations, in different, what some cloud vendors call availability zones, takes care of what for media companies is a big headache and a substantial expense, which is really how do they keep their business going in the case of some sort of an outage or natural disaster that affects a particular geographic area. The cloud is fundamentally based on IT best practices. And I strongly believe that it's a benefit to our industry to adopt IT best practices with our own special sauce, using those where they make sense for us. So there are huge investments in the cloud in automation tools, and we really need to get, just to pick one example, we need to get to the point where it's much easier for our industry to leverage the huge amounts of investment that have been made in those technologies in the cloud. And frankly, there's a very large pool of employees, potential employees in the media industry that are IT experts. One of the challenges we've had in the past is you bring an IT expert into a traditional media facility, and basically you may have brought, hopefully, a very smart person into your organization, but you can't take advantage of that person until they've been in that facility 6 months and they've started to get some idea of how our infrastructure works, how our technologies work. But if we adopt cloud-based production, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of potential employees out there that could be useful to us in a much shorter period of time if our core infrastructures are based on technologies that they already know. So all of that is great as we look at this green bit, and there's all this promise that we had in the previous slide. But what's the current reality? Well, the current reality is regarding the green bit and the cloud, almost everything that we do can be done now. There's this very small segment, it's worth a lot of money in our industry, the live sports segment. But it really, when you consider everything else that we do in the media industry, kind of in terms of activities, it's a fairly small piece, and that's really, really live sports. And it's hard to do that, but almost everything else can be done in IT, on generic hardware, in the cloud, on leased hardware, or on-premise right now. But the fact is that this is really open to get the full benefits of this. It's really open to only a few. Another reality right now is that the platform will not be adopted or modified for our needs. So if you go talk to Microsoft or Amazon or any of those about modifying their cloud platforms to support our requirements, the reality is that we are such a small industry compared to those guys, other clients, that we are going to have to make their infrastructure work for us, not the other way around. Another current reality is that if almost everything is possible now, the fact is that a lot of media companies are finding that they have to employ in-house developers to really get the maximum benefit out of moving to these new platforms, to moving to IT-based platforms. Another reality is that if you've got your in-house developers, the way you get the most bang for the buck out of your investment in cloud technologies is to get really close to one of these cloud vendors. And that's because each cloud vendor have specific functionalities and specific ways of doing things. And if you understand those things deeply, let's say high performance caching as an example, which is going to be very important for us in delivering video content, then if you really understand deeply how things work with a particular vendor, cloud vendor, then you're going to be able to get the most out of that. And your platform, your particular OTT platform or your particular mobile platform is going to work better than that other media company's platform because you really know how to use it. And so what this means is that there are a few large media companies who see that investing in the cloud with dedicated development teams that really understand a particular platform's technology is a competitive advantage. And in that case, those media companies that I talk to are not that interested in establishing a base level of interoperability because they have worked very hard with those cloud vendors to differentiate what they do and to get better functionality, better responsiveness, different particular looks out of their applications, and they don't want other media companies to have the same thing. So this is a challenge we face. So this results in very close partnerships between some broadcasters, and let's be clear, these are very big, usually these are very big media companies, and they're selected cloud vendors. It also results in a lack of sharing amongst these broadcasters. And the broadcasters say, some of the broadcasters I talk to, and some of these same people say they want a public multi-vendor on-prem, off-prem solution. But I wonder in a way, do they really? The current situation almost results in what you might call lock-in by choice. So the media companies purposely select a particular vendor because of the advantages that I pointed out earlier. Excuse me. So if the current reality I've described really is the current reality, is everything great? Are we happy with that as an industry? It's a question. Or are there shared pain points as you are looking, whether you're an end user or you're a supplier or you're a system integrator or software programmer, in any of those roles, are there shared pain points that we could work on together? How can we find that out? Or is this new world we're in just too competitive and people are too disrupted, trying to figure out what their business models are to really focus on trying to establish some sort of common base on which we could innovate together, where everybody makes more money and is more successful? What about this microservices view versus the traditional product view? Is this fundamentally, the ideas that we're putting forward here, fundamentally unacceptable to suppliers? Just can't work. Love the idea, thanks Brad, can't make it work, or don't need it to work. And lastly, and I think this is really critical for me, to be clear, I don't want to put any work into something that really is not useful. I have no desire. But the converse of that is there something that we could do together that would be useful to the industry in that green bit? If there is, I would love to do it. I think the board of the AMWA would be enthusiastic about it. I think we have the structure, the IPR rules, everything else, our engineering practices in place to do that. Basically, we have this engine that could be harnessed to work on things that are important in this area. We just need to collectively identify what those are and to be sure that they're really linked to some sort of a business requirement. So why the AMWA? Why not somebody else? It's a good question. I've been asked that a number of times. I guess one thing is that it fits into our role working a lot with software and APIs over the years, and our experience with the JTNM. Our processes are designed around business-driven solutions, and we, you may or may not agree with this, but we believe very strongly that there may be all kinds of great technologies and ideas out here, but if we can't, that whoever, whether it's the AMWA or anybody else that takes this on, if it's not driven by an actual business need by customers at the end of the day, media companies, then it could just end up being a huge time sink for the industry. And the AMWA processes and our requirements to start up a project really drive that to the forefront. And I think especially in this time, it's maybe not so clear what the business interests are. And so it's really good to have an organization looking into this that is really focused on the business first. We'll figure out the technology second. And lastly, I would say that this software and services approach and so on, it's really in the AMWA's DNA. It's how we do things, and we've been doing that for a while. We've already identified some aspects of the need, some of the things that we've talked about, identity, timing, the modeling, and so on. Those have been previously put out there in a document called the Agile Media Discussion Document, and you can download that at the link that's shown on your screen here, amwa.tv/brochures. I'd like to recognize Dr. Richard Cartwright, who was a co-contributor with me on on that paper. So there's already a base of knowledge, and we have the JT&M reference architecture and the models from that as well. So we have a number of pieces in that. So how would we actually start this discussion or determine that there's nothing there? So let's go back and talk about the AMWA and its processes for a minute. No project proceeds without clearly defined business benefits and the resources to deliver. So if we don't have those two things, no matter how good an idea is, the AMWA is not gonna take that on. Also, you'll need to be a general or a principal member to participate in this. They're automatically part of those discussions. Next, we need to define what problem needs to be solved from a business perspective. Input is welcome from all end users, members or not. We don't care whether you're a member of the AMWA or not. We really need your ideas. And we also would really appreciate suppliers' views, because a lot of times, I guess two factors. One is suppliers interact with a lot of different users, so they're in a good place to understand a number of different views from different users and can bring those to the table, whereas a user only sees the world from their particular perspective. And also, a lot of times the suppliers really understand the business practicality of things, and we've touched on some of those and some of the realities for business from supplier standpoint might be a non-starter. Another point is, sometimes, speaking as an end user, I can tell you, end users really don't realize the value of something until the idea is put in front of them. And a lot of times suppliers are looking at technologies and thinking about business applications because they want to make money from it. So suppliers are welcome to put in their ideas as well. All I'll tell you is, at the end of the day, as the AMWA is looking to kick off a project, we will require users to be at the table and say they support your idea. So there's no problem with suppliers putting an idea out there as suggestions forward as part of this. But just be aware that we will require end user to be a proponent of it. Remember, anything that you bring forward as part of this needs to be business driven. The questions to be answered by an end user, or if you're a supplier proxying for an end user, is what most needs solving by agile workflows? What's the greatest pain point? What's the broadest need? And I think what we can do within the AMWA is collect the inputs, and then at a subsequent meeting like this, we can tell you what we've heard, and we can identify what the broadest needs, if there were common pain points, and identify anything that we could do that would be an easy win, the low-hanging fruit. So if you would, please contact us. We must have business-driven input to proceed with this. Please provide your thoughts to Neil Dunstan, who, as I said, is the Director of Marketing and Membership for the AMWA, and myself, Brad at Gilmer.tv. Do contact us. And at this point, I'd like to throw things open. If anybody has any questions or comments, we have a few minutes. So unmute, speak up, and let's see if anybody has anything to talk about here. All right, if anybody's talking, just be aware I'm not hearing you. You may still be on mute. All right, if there's nothing further, I really thank you very much for your time. One thing I would say is that it would be great to get your input within the next couple of weeks. because then we can incorporate that into our meetings, our strategic planning meetings that I've been talking about. And with that, I really appreciate, again, your participation, and thanks for your time. Bye.